I'm showing 5 p.m. So let's go ahead and get started. Trish, I'll turn it over to you for the introduction.
Right. Good evening. The City of Fort Lauderdale Historic Preservation Board will be conducting a virtual and in-person meeting this evening in accordance with the Governor's executive order related to conducting local government public meetings while under the public health emergency related to the COVID-19 epidemic. The public can view a live stream of this meeting at www.fortlauderdale.gov/FLTV. To participate in the meeting, please fill out a virtual meeting form on the city's website at www.fortlauderdale.gov/government/HPB. Individuals who wish to speak will be heard prior to the close of the public comment period. If you have trouble signing up, please email planning@fortlauderdale.gov or call 954-828-5265. Please provide your name and address. If you cannot be identified, you will not be provided access to the meeting. Participants, please remember to mute yourself if you are not speaking and silence any other devices and speakers so we do not hear interference. I will now turn it over to the chair to start the meeting.
Great, thank you so much. Meeting will be called to order at 5:01 p.m. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Let's go ahead and start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Carney, you wanna kick us off here?
Yeah, sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the country which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Thanks.
Jamie, are you on? And if so, could you call the roll for us?
Yes. Ms. Lyons? Here. Mr. Marcus?
Present.
Mr. Carney?
Present.
Mr. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Here.
Ms. Zara? Mr. Chavon? And Chair Blank.
Present.
You have a quorum.
Thank you so much, Jamie, and good evening. Appreciate everything you do always. With that, let's go ahead and call up the minutes. Has everybody had a chance to review them? And if so, are there any amendments or modifications needing to be made? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to adopt or to approve.
I move to approve.
Thank you. Moved by Ms. Lyons, seconded by Mr. Rosa. Thank you so much. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes will be approved from our meeting of February 1st, 2021. Thank you so much. Moving on, I do know that I believe we have some people who had signed up. Mrs. Zara, I see you were able to join us. Thank you so much. Let the record reflect that Mrs. Zara is present, joined the meeting at 5:03 p.m. Thank you so much. We just called roll. You didn't miss anything, so good timing. All right, so I believe we have a few members of the public that have signed up to speak, if I'm not mistaken. And if so, can we have them sworn in, please?
If you're going to speak to the board, can you please raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Moderator, could you please unmute the persons that have signed up to speak so they can answer?
I do.
Yes, thank you.
I do.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. I also see that Mr. Chavon has joined us. Tim, good to see you. Good evening. Thanks for being here. We just called roll. You haven't missed much. Record will reflect. And Mr. Chavon has joined us also at 5:03 p.m. Perfect timing. All right, so that'll bring us to our first agenda item. Certificate of Appropriateness for Major Alterations, case number UDP HP 21002, after the fact installation of a painted wall sign and super graphic at the address of 200 Southwest 2 Street. Let's go ahead and do disclosures first. I'm going to just run down the line on my screen. Ms. Lyons?
Yes, I drove by and I had a phone call from Mr. Burke, to which I didn't have time to reply.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Parker, any disclosures?
Where am I?
Dave, you're muted.
I spoke with him.
Great, thank you. Mr. Carney?
I spoke with the owner.
Thank you. Mr. Marcus?
I drove by.
Okay. Mr. Chavon, any disclosures?
I also spoke with the owner.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Cesara?
I spoke with the owner and I drove by also.
Thank you. Mr. Rosa?
I spoke with the applicant and have driven by as well.
Thank you. I received a call from the applicant and I apologize for not getting back to him. I missed his phone call and quite frankly, forgot to call back. So sorry about that. All right. With that, I believe we have the applicant present in chambers to speak on behalf of the application. Am I correct there?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, great. So, Mr. Applicant, if you could please state your name, give us your address on the record, and then feel free to address the board, anything you'd like to for us to be aware of in support of your application.
Thank you. My name is Steve Burke. I am here on behalf of a new establishment at 200 Southwest 2nd Street called Munchie's Pizza Barcade. I actually have Munchie with me down below, who is the dog that the barcade was named after. And to the esteemed members of the Historic Preservation Board, first off, let me apologize in advance for not knowing that I needed to request a certificate of appropriateness for this mural. I was unaware that our building, which is a non-contributing building and a newer building in the district, would need to come before the board. And had I known that, I promise you I would not have spent thousands on a mural before it was approved. So for that, I apologize for my ignorance. But let me get to the meat and potatoes of the mural and why it's significant and why I believe it is appropriate for the district. First and foremost, we didn't just get anybody off the street to paint this artwork. It is a beautiful artwork painted by a world-renowned muralist by the name of Ian Wilkinson, who has murals on multiple museums throughout the world, including the Holocaust Museum in Virginia. He's also listed in the National Mural Registry. So it's an honor to have one of his works in Broward County. And I was very pleased that he was willing to do something on the building. The artwork that we commissioned for the front of this building was done so in a style to be consistent with the Broward Center for the Performing Arts garage. We basically used that exact same style so that it would maintain the appropriateness of the neighborhood. Again, my not knowing that our neighborhood actually had certain boundaries for the Historic Preservation Board. So, our intent was certainly to make sure that it kept in the style of other artworks that were very close by. And so we commissioned Mr. Wilkinson to make a mural that was very similar to the one at the Paca garage. Furthermore, again, apologize for my ignorance, but the reason why we didn't think that we needed permission for this mural was because there was a previous mural on our building for the past 15, 20 years. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Tarpon Bend. It was a world-class establishment here in Fort Lauderdale. It was loved by residents and tourists alike, and they had a mural adorning their walls for many, many years. Furthermore, we also have murals on the properties right next door at Taco Craft and Mr. Bones Bar and Grill. And so that was honestly the reason why I didn't know that we needed to seek permission, just because there seemed to be murals on all these walls. And so we thought that we would be able to do so. So once again, my apologies for my ignorance. Really what I want the board to consider and to take into account, and my parents were the first to tell me that they thought I was crazy to open up a family-friendly restaurant and bar in the middle of a pandemic. Our street, if you don't know, over the past few years has been in a major decline. And as a property owner, we didn't want this space to continue to sit empty. So we invested hundreds of thousands of dollars into a renovation of a place so that we could hopefully bring back a better crowd, bring back the street to what it used to be in its heyday. And so we opened up a family-friendly pizza restaurant and arcade with old school 1980s arcades inside the restaurant for children to come and play. We are also a dog-friendly establishment. Obviously, we're named after Munchie the dog, so we encourage people to come with their dogs. We have outdoor seating, and what we're really trying to do is change this street, bring a better crowd to the street, and we believe that our mural adds character and allows people to want to cross over the railroad tracks and come into the historic district. So that could only be a net positive for the area, for the district. if we encourage more people to come to our street, especially during the day, I think it'll revitalize the neighborhood. And that's really what we're hoping to do as a landlord and as a proprietor of a new restaurant and bar. We want to attract a good crowd and bring the street back to its heyday. We didn't change any structures. We didn't alter any windows. This is just paint on a non-contributing building. And as somebody who lives in a historic home, my home was built in 1929. I actually ran for mayor of Miami Beach about 10 years ago with the support of the historic preservationists. And I'm all about preserving history. I'm a big advocate for the preservation of old structures and old homes. I do not believe this particular building, it's not historic, and we don't think that we changed the structure or altered any of the history of the street. So we're hoping for your approval and you give a certificate of appropriateness so we can conduct our business and sell a lot of pizzas to help pay for that mural. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Are there any members of the public that wish to be heard on this item? Do we have anybody signed up by any chance? All right, hearing none, we'll go ahead and close public comment. As for the board, any questions of the applicant? Ms. Lyons. You're muted, Barbara, sorry.
There.
There you go.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's all right.
How were you made aware of that this was that there was a problem with this mural?
I was given a code violation by a code compliance officer who came in and handed me the violation. And he said candidly to me, he said, between you and I, my wife is an artist and this mural is beautiful. I hope they give you a certificate of appropriateness because I think it's artwork and it's just paint. So after I received that violation, I then went, because I didn't know the process, I went next door to the Historical Society and I asked them if they could help me. And they told me that they didn't believe my building was historic, so I wouldn't need a certificate of appropriateness, but they forwarded me to Trisha. And then I called Trisha and she told me about the violation. And she told me that I needed to put together a packet and be in front of the Historic Preservation Board. So I've just been following the instructions of Trisha, and here I am today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lyons. Anybody other, geez, I cannot speak tonight. I apologize. Any other members of the, I've not been sleeping. The new baby isn't letting me do that. Any other members of the board wish to address any concerns or questions with the applicant? Anybody?
Just a comment.
I'm going to let Mr. Parker go first, and then we'll bring it to you, Mr. Chabon.
Just a comment. There is confusion a little bit because the Himmershey Village is sort of a separate historical section here. And a lot of people don't realize, that the Sebo Bend community is separated from that. And that causes some confusion. That's all.
Okay, Mr. Parker. Mr. Chabon?
In the interest of time, I think the guy did a very nice job explaining where he's at with all this. And there was an existing mural there. It's paint on a building. There's no structural change. I don't see where we would have a reason to say no to this. I think it's an issue for the code department of the city of Fort Lauderdale. If they went ahead and approved this, then he's good to go. The only little hiccup he's got right now is in front of us. And I really don't see where there's any interruption or where it's doesn't fit the program for that neighborhood. In fact, I understand his struggle trying to keep his restaurant open right now. And that area used to really be vibrant and it has really gone downhill. So hats off to anybody down there who's willing to take the risk, put the time and energy in, and it is an attractive, beautiful work of art. It's a $10,000 mural. So it's, to me, as a matter of protocol, I guess we're here to give it a nod or a nay or a yay. And I personally think it should be a yay.
Thank you, Mr. Chabon. Any other members?
I second.
Ms. Cesaro?
I said I second. He said he gave it a yay, and I said I second.
Okay. Thank you. Any other members of the board wish to comment or be heard? Mr. Carney.
What was the total cost on the mural there?
Yeah, the total cost was inside and outside was about $12,000, and it was one artist and an assistant, and it took them about a week.
Okay, thank you.
Just to follow up on that, you said inside and outside the mural. What do you mean by inside and outside? Because
we have our bathrooms are painted.
I see. So the total paint job of the facility was 10 to 12.
Yeah, really, it was about $10,000 for the outside and about $2,000 for the inside.
Understood. Thank you, Mr. Marcus.
Yes, sorry, I lost the video earlier, so I was fishing around. Mr. Burke, I remember you when you ran for mayor of Miami Beach because I used to live there. So hello. I drove by the building today because I really wanted to see what it looked like in its context. And on the plus side, I thought it certainly looked far less in your face than it did in the pictures which you submitted, because it really sort of is it part of the neighborhood. My big concern, coming from a historic preservation background, is the kind of precedent that this sets, because this board will be dealing with all those issues. So I think we need to, I've thought about this, and driving around the city, even a few blocks away, there's a nice mural on the side of the art museum. There's murals all over, but obviously the difference is in a historic area. And I'm just wondering if maybe there's a way to somehow visually separate the commercial area on 2nd Street from the rest of the historic district in terms of allowing things like this. I wouldn't want to see this popping up throughout the district. So
Mr. Marcus, if I may, I think the big difference here is that most of the buildings on our street are actually old buildings with plaques on them that speak to their historic preservation. Ours is really the only newer building that's non-contributing. Now, I do agree with you. I absolutely believe that the historic district might want to consider carving out a couple buildings in the district that aren't contributing buildings. But that said, I don't think you're going to see this become a trend in our area, because all of the neighbors on our street are actually historic buildings with plaques on them. And we did, I failed to mention in my presentation that we did achieve the approvals of many of the nonprofit organizations that are in the district, including the Riverwalk Association, the Himmershey Downtown Village Association, neighboring property owners and landlords. So we included those letters of approval in the back of our packet if you guys did not get a chance to read those. But we went out and sought our neighbors' approval and all of the nonprofits that have helped to contribute to our district to make sure that everybody was okay with it.
Thank you. So Trish, I have a couple of questions here before I really address them, I guess, in the reference to the petition. The way it appears to me is there are really two issues here. We're dealing with the sign, which would be the actual logo of the business on the upper portion of the balcony, or the upper, above the balcony. And then the secondary aspect is the multicolored, mural that spans across the entire front of the facade. Am I correct that we should be considering those as two separate issues as they relate to the ULDR?
Yes, they are two separate things. Well, in the ULDR, they are described and defined as two separate things. So you can look at it that way.
Okay.
In the design guidelines, it doesn't necessarily speak to super graphics or murals on building facades, but.
So let me ask you this then, Trish, because as I'm reading your recommendation here, the staff's response, you note that the sign itself is appropriate in size. There's no real issue with the sign. When I say the sign, I mean the painted logo itself. Am I correct then in my understanding that what it is that you take issue with is the more vast, multicolored, design across the rest of the facade. That's really what's at issue here.
Yes, that's correct.
All right, because when I look at this and I'm looking at the ULDR and the sections, and I'm looking at the way that we are supposed to be interpreting it, when we look at the secondary part, the distinguishing original, and this is ULDR, I'm reading from the staff report, the ULDR section 47-24.11, point D, point 3, point C, point 2, or point II. The distinguishing original qualities or character of a building, structure, or site and its environment shall not be destroyed. The removal or alteration of any historic material or distinctive architectural features should be avoided when possible. And you said that the visual impact of the supergraphic detracts from the architectural features, and therefore, for that reason, it did not meet the criteria. But I guess I'm failing to see how the mural destroys, removes, or alters the historic material or distinctive architectural features.
It doesn't destroy architectural features, it detracts from it. And then overall, this is within a historic district, so you have to look at the overall character of the area and how it fits in within that character.
I guess I'm just having some trouble here because
It's in my ear.
I guess I'm having a little bit of trouble here.
Where my ear?
No, just get it out of your ear.
Can Mr. Moderator, can we mute that member of the public, please? Thank you. I'm just having a little trouble of figuring out how, because it is a painted mural of this style and the fashion that it is, that we can even really argue that it is something that falls within our purview almost. This is a paint job that I'm not sure in and of itself would fall within the bounds of that section of the code that I just read, because the section of the code doesn't talk about detracting from the architectural features necessarily. But let me also say, I have concerns like what Mr. Marcus raised, that if we allow and make too much of an exception here, that we could be facing an expansive response from businesses throughout the historic district that we're in. And I don't know what kind of a precedent we set there.
Not good.
So in this case, in discussing this particular paint on this building with our zoning division, the larger area that's painted was considered to be a super graphic, which is defined in our ordinance under the sign code. And in that way, it does trigger the need for the Historic Preservation Board to review this as per the code within 4716, where it does require all signs within the H1 him or she historic district to be reviewed by the Historic Preservation Board and take into consideration the location, type, size, material, text, visual impact, shape, character, height, and orientation. So that's specifically from the ordinance and the code. So that's how the board.
So when Tarpon Bend did their repaint job about 3 years ago, I believe that was before I was on the board. Did that come before the board?
Tarpon Bend was in existence. I'm not sure when they opened, maybe around 2001. And I don't know when they applied the murals that were on the structure at that point in time. We don't have a record of them coming before the board for that in particular.
Which murals are you discussing?
They towards the end of the life of Tarpon Bend, and I only speak from personal experience of living in Fort Lauderdale, being a resident here and a frequent visitor to that establishment when it was open. They did a paint job. They put up a mural along the front that essentially was a sign with their logo and their name, and then they did color. I think it was a blue, if I remember correctly, which was different from the old white. It used to be white with just a sign up there.
In the packet.
Is it in the packet? Yeah, it might. And it just, I was curious as to whether or not that was brought before the board, and if so, how that was addressed. Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's on page 28, 54. You'll see it, and you can see the logo and the mural that was done. And that was recent. I think that was done in 2016 or 2017, maybe.
It was done recently, Mr. Blank, and also the mural that adorns the front of Taco Craft was done in the last 3 years. I don't believe they were in front of the board either. And to address your concerns over this becoming a consistent thing in front of the board, we've had murals in this district, as you just mentioned, on Tarpon Bend and on Taco Craft and next door Mr. Bones, and it did not cause this domino effect of murals in the district. It did not cause a proliferation of murals on all the other buildings in the historic district. We're the first to be in front of the board, and we would ask to be treated the same way, fairly, that Taco Craft and Tarpon Bend had these murals without any complaints from residents, without any violations from any code compliance officers. Mm-hmm. And again, to keep in line with the neighborhood, we did our mural in the exact same style as the mural 3 blocks away in front of the Broward Center for the Performing Arts. So all we're really asking for is a fair chance to do some business. We think we made a beautiful artwork on the building by a renowned muralist, and we do not believe that this is going to cause any sort of proliferation of murals in the historic district.
Yeah, I just want to note that as this, you speak of the other murals and the other buildings, and my understanding is that they were not brought before the board. I certainly cannot speak as to why. So this being the first type of case before the board of this type, I assure you that whatever decision this board makes would be applied equally to those who are similarly situated. That is something that we strive to do. So you should certainly have no concerns of anything other than that being done moving forward. But nonetheless, this board is bound, and I say this often, my board members will probably roll their eyes or smile, one of the two, but we are bound by the 4 corners of the petition. And of course by the code that we are to follow as a guide. They are not mandatory rules that we must follow, but they are guides. They are guidelines that we are supposed to follow to do our best in our role as a historic preservation board to preserve these historic districts as they are so denoted. So just keep that in mind as the discussion progresses.
I have a quick question for Mr. Burke.
Yeah, please, Mr. Marcus.
I have a quick question for Mr. Burke on what he just recently said. You were talking about a building 3 blocks away near the Broward Center that already has murals on it. Is that similar in character to your building in terms of being a historic building, being contributing, non-contributing?
It's almost identical to our building, actually. If you compare the 2 murals, that was the mural that we used as inspiration to our artist that we commissioned. We said we wanted to look very similar to this with the similar color pattern and the similar color scheme. And again, not knowing that the invisible boundary of the historic district just left out this garage, which is literally 100 yards away. It is nearly identical in character, in size. The age of the building is identical. The size of the mural is identical.
But you're saying that the other building is a garage?
Correct. The other building is a garage built about the same time that our building was built. It's also, I think, 2 or 3 stories. The size of the mural is similar. And if you look in the packet, we have a picture of the other building. It's on, I think, page 27 of your packet. So you can see across the street from the theater, the mural that's on that building is nearly identical to the mural that's on our building.
Unfortunately, the only difference is that's not a historic building.
Ours is not a historic building either. It's
in a historic district. Yeah.
In the district, yes.
Trish, the garage is or is not in the district?
It is not within the historic district.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Ms. Lyons. I apologize. Sorry.
Well, I think you can see this from 2 very different points of view. And that is, I don't perceive the Tarpon Bend painting on the outside as a mural. I see it as a blend of white and blue that complements the integrity of the architecture. And I understand very clearly what the staff has used to describe the visual impact of the overall supergraphic detracts from the building's architectural features. And I also understand, having looked around at all the buildings, and I've been down in that area many, many times, it's dramatically different from all the other buildings of character. I mean, all the other buildings in the area. And yet, at the same time, the flip side is that it's very dramatic. It is a mural. I do not consider what's on the Taco Craft a mural, nor do I consider what's on No Bones a mural, but that's a matter of semantics, I assume. And so it really does enliven the building and makes it very attractive. But I do agree that it doesn't conform to the character of the historic district. So I think we're between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Ms. Lyons, and that's the struggle, the internal struggle that I'm finding right now, Mr. Chabot.
Listen, we're on the books that we have to make a decision. It's clearly stated that it comes to our consideration. This is a gray area. It's almost like it's unestablished. All things considered, this is in my opinion, this is very harmless. This is paint on a building. This is not a change of the structure. It's not a change of the architecture. Whether it's complementary or non-complementary is a matter of opinion. And that's what we're here for. We all have different opinions. But again, all things considered, when we repurpose historic buildings for people to go in and make a living and contribute to the area, bring business into the area, I look at this differently. I look at that as an attractive invitation into the neighborhood, and therefore it brings people in to appreciate our historic area. It's not going to be a pure situation where we preserve everything exactly the way it used to be. It's impossible to do that and make money. We're getting the best that we can get, all things considered. I make a motion or a suggestion that we allow this to go forward in this case, and we should continue conversations if we want to be separating commercial buildings or non-compliant, if these are things that we need to consider for new ways to proceed. But I don't think this guy should be taxed because we aren't clearly right on this just now. But I don't see the harm in it. I think he's done a nice job and he's followed suit with what was there before, and there's no reason for us to deny it.
So, Mr. Shimon, is that a motion to approve the petition?
It is.
Okay. Mr. Rosa, I know that you want to speak, so I'll allow discussion on the motion.
Yeah, I want to see.
Hang on. I just want to ask, is there a second of Mr. Chabon's motion?
Further discussion, please.
And we will have discussion on the motion, but there's been a motion made, so we need to find out if there is a second to move forward with the motion.
I'll second it.
Okay, seconded by Mr. Carney. A second being had.
May I ask a question, Mr. Chair? May I just ask if it includes the staff condition on page 3 of the staff report?
Yes, that it be subject to the approval of the building zoning and all ULDR requirements. Mr. Chabon, I assumed that was part of it. Am I correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Have it run right through the line the way it's been proposed.
And adopting findings of fact in the staff report as well?
And adopting the findings of fact as discussed in this meeting.
Can you repeat the proposal?
But we're going to, one moment. So at that point in time, let's have discussion on the motion. I know Ms. Lyons wants to be heard. Mr. Marcus wants to be heard. Mr. Rosa, I believe, wanted to make comment. I'm going to allow Mr. Rosa first because he has not yet been heard. And then if there's anybody else who wishes to have discussion on the motion, just raise your hand, get my attention. We'll go from there. Mr. Rosa.
I'll make mine very brief because I echo much of what Mr. Chabon said. And I think if you look at the application in its entirety, and it's very well done application in the sense that it's very organized and there's supportive documentation here with the Downtown Authority, with the Hermitage Village Association, with I believe the Riverwalk, Fort Lauderdale group that came in, and from the magazine. This area needs to be activated. I walk this area every day, 4 or 5 days a week, where I'm going from South Andrews back to Sailboat Bend. And it's been in disrepair for a year, at least, even pre-pandemic. When Tarpon Bend had closed down, this area, especially this building, anchored this district, and not having it made a difference, a big difference in a bad way. So to have it brought back online, I give a lot of kudos to the applicant because it was a bold initiative to do it, and I really read sincerely from the applicant that this was not done to circumvent the rules. This was done mistakenly, and I think the owning of that has meant a lot. And I think we really owe it to the district to give the deference it's due in this case and look at it in the way that Mr. Chavone framed. I don't need to take any more time. We can speak on the motion, but I'm very much in support of it.
Thank you, Mr. Rosa. Ms. Lyons.
Well, I wanted to make the point. I don't know if everybody has their packet in page 28, but the way the former painting was applied to the building conforms to the structure of the building by outlining its horizontal and curving and vertical elements. And the current mural slashes through those. And that's why I think that the staff has flagged this and talked about a super graphic detracting from the architectural features. Now, my second issue is this is a non-historic structure, correct?
Yes, this building was built in the 1990s.
Okay. Third question, are all the other buildings in this area along this street historic?
No. Most of the other buildings, I believe, are historic and have plaques on them.
So in fact, we would not have this problem in the future. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lyons. Mr. Marcus.
Just two short comments. I wanted to say in response to what Mr. Chavone said, I agree with some of what he said, but paint is not a little thing when it comes to historic preservation. If you look at every community in South Florida that has historic preservation rules, they're very concerned about paint, as Tricia mentioned in her comments, because it does detract from the architecture of the building if not done correctly. And Ms. Lyons just pointed out the difference between the current and the proposed. I'm still having a hard
time. Arthur.
Pardon?
We lost you, Arthur.
Oh, no. He's still there. At least for me. I don't know about everyone else.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So I was just saying that paint is not a small thing. And I'm really torn here because Mr. Burke has the right attitude, and he certainly wants to make the right impression. My one question to Mr. Burke is, when did you find out that this was a historic district? Obviously, you didn't when you bought the building.
Yeah, we found out when I got the code violation, and I went next door to the historic society, which I learned was not a part of the city. Right. And they didn't even know the rules themselves. They thought that we did not need a certificate of appropriateness because our building is not old. So I absolutely respect all of the opinions of the board regarding preserving the construction of historic buildings. But I want to impress upon everyone that our building is a new building. And so while yes, Tarpon Bend had white columns there, our building is not old. It was built in I believe the 1990s. And we are one of the only buildings in our district that is not a contributing building. All the other buildings are quite old. I know all the property owners in the building. They have no intentions on doing murals. We are a non-contributing building. So therefore, preserving the architecture of our newish building should not be as important as the entire district's preserving of their architecture. And furthermore, you can still approve ours, and everybody else would still have to come up in front of your board to make sure that you do approve the artwork and you approve their plans. I can guarantee you at this point, our whole street knows now the process because we've gone door to door to them and asked their permission and asked for a letter of recommendation. So everyone on our street, there's probably only 6 or 7 property owners and establishments there. They now do know the process. They know that if they want to have a mural, it's unlikely they'll get approved because A, they're a historic building, we are not, and B, they now know the process to go in front of the board. So I asked for some deference from the board to make this exception for us since we are not an old building, and therefore the preserving of our architecture is not as important as the other architecture of the buildings on our historic street.
I'll be honest with you, Mr. Burke. I don't find the argument that you should be separated out by the fact that your building is not historic from taking steps to preserve the integrity of the historic district which your building is in. What I do find compelling is the community support. This Marcus with his lines. I feel like we're between a rock and a hard place. But I can tell you that I personally was swayed more by the community support than the attempt to separate yourself from the rest of your brethren in the historic district. But I also want to point out that I certainly do appreciate your acknowledgement of the recognition about, oops, we didn't know at the time. I mean, like, that's the reality of the situation, right? A lot of people don't. And our board has taken some steps to do what we can to try to remedy that to some extent, working with property appraiser so that people are more aware if their building is in a historic district or is a historic building, because it's important that people know what they're getting into when they get into it so that they can then take the steps necessary to follow the rules and regulations as they must. We all know ignorance of the law is not a defense, right? That's always been the case. But nonetheless, it is certainly welcoming to see that acknowledgement. All right, I think that we will close discussion on the motion. I think it's time to call that question. So Mr. Chavon's motion, seconded by Mr. Carney, I believe, is to approve the application subject to the condition of the Planning and Zoning Board, subject to Planning and Zoning Board approval and regulations, with the findings of fact as discussed by the board in this meeting. With that, I'll call the question. All those in favor of...
May I read the resolution? Mr.
Oh, yes, please. I'm sorry.
A resolution of the Historic Preservation Board of the City of Lauderdale, Florida, approving a certificate of appropriateness for a major alteration after the fact for the property located at 200 Southwest 2nd Street, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, for the installation of a painted wall sign and a super graphic, case number UDP HP 21002.
Thank you so much. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Mr. Marcus is opposed. Any others? All right. Mr. Marcus would be reflected as the only member in opposition. Mr. Marcus, I don't say that to call you out. Since we did a voice vote, I just want to make sure. All right. So then the motion carries. Thank you so much, Mr. Burke, for reaching out to us and for appearing tonight. We certainly appreciate it. Best of luck to you with your business.
Thank you very much. Please come for some pizza.
Mr. Chair.
I'm going to come for those arcade games. I'm just letting you know.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Chavon.
Unfortunately, I had a prowler on my property in the middle of all this, and if you heard my dog barking, and I had to go out and help him leave my yard. I would like to leave the meeting, call the police department, get in my car, and try to find this person. I'll be back as soon as I can.
Thank you so much.
But he was in my tool shed going through my properties.
Best of luck. Go take care of your business, sir.
Thank you, sir. I'll be back as soon as I can.
Cheers. All right, we'll move on to the second item on our agenda. It's a certificate of appropriateness for major alterations, case number UDP HP 21003. The request for an installation of a 4-foot high horizontal wood plank fence in the front yard of a location at 734 West Los Olas Boulevard. Let's go ahead and do our disclosures. We will start with Ms. Lyons.
I have driven by the property and walked by the property.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Parker?
Yes, I've been there.
Okay, Mr. Carney? Any disclosures?
Nothing to disclose.
Thank you. Mr. Marcus?
Just driving by the property.
Thank you. Mr. Chavon just stepped out. Mr. Rosa? Mr. Rosa, you're muted. Any disclosures for us? You might have stepped away for a moment. Let's move on to Ms. Cesaro while we're waiting for Mr. Rosa. Ms. Cesaro, any disclosures?
I am familiar with the property. I see it all the time.
Okay, thank you. And let me just check in while we're waiting for Mr. Rosa. Do we still have a quorum? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, we're good. 7. Okay. We will, when Mr. Rosa returns, we'll get his disclosures. But with that, let's go ahead and have Trish read the staff report, please.
Tricia Logan, Urban Design and Planning. This application is from an applicant from last month who came before the board to request the approval of an after-the-fact 6-foot-high privacy fence in the front yard, and now they're back to request with a new application to request a 4-foot-high horizontal plank wood fence in the front yard in the same location as the 6-foot-high fence that was previously requested, as well as to replace an existing chain link fence that runs along Las Olas. And this application, the request does not meet the criteria that's outlined in the Historic Preservation Design Guidelines that recommends limiting the height of fences in the front yards to 36 inches in height with a picket style that is at least 30% open. And it does also recommend lower fence heights in the front yards throughout the neighborhood to allow for visual access to the historic structures and also to maintain and as well as enhance a consistent pedestrian level streetscape. So with that said, it does partially meet the criteria that's in the material and design guidelines. Material and design guidelines does allow for a wood style fence in the neighborhood, but does recommend that there is spacing between the pickets with a maximum of 6 inches. So with that said, in the summary conclusion, in accordance with sections 472411 D3CI and 472411 D3CII of the ULDR, staff finds that the application for a COA for major alterations under case number UDP-HP21003 located at 734 West Las Olas Boulevard does not meet the criteria as outlined in section 472411 D3CI of the ULDR and does not meet the criteria as outlined in section 4724 D3CII of the ULDR and partially meets the criteria as outlined in section 4717 of the ULDR. The following condition is provided to the board for their consideration, which is this application is subject to the approval by building, zoning, and all ULDR requirements, including landscaping.
Thank you, Trish. Do we have anybody here on behalf of the petition and or is the petitioner here, the applicant?
The applicant is online. He is a panelist, Michael and Dahlia Orris.
Yeah. Oh, are they already in the room? Can we unmute the Orses, please, so that they can address the board? That'd be great. Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Please go ahead and state your name or names on the record, as well as your address, and then let us know anything you'd like in support of your application.
Sure. Thanks for welcoming me back. My name is Michael Loris. I'm the homeowner at 734 West Las Olas Boulevard. We had this discussion last month regarding the privacy fence, and because there were some other issues going on, we decided that we would resubmit and re-meet this month regarding the fence. Kind of refresh your memory. We bought the house a couple of years ago. We were doing a major renovation. When we purchased the house, it had a large 6-foot vertical plank fence that ran the length of the entire front of the house with a chain link fence that wrapped from the edge of the house around Las Olas Boulevard. It was in disrepair when we bought it. I was getting citations from code enforcement needing to fix it. In that time, which is really the crux of the whole request for the alteration, is a matter of safety. And it's kind of apropos that Mr. Chavon has an issue today, because this is kind of what happened 3 times to me, before the fence went up. It's a matter of safety. It's a very busy intersection and streets. We've had, as you see in the packet, there's 2 police reports. I've had someone overdose in my backyard, leaving feces on my patio. Just a very undesirable situation. So being a father and a husband, I decided to erect a fence that I felt would be more protective. I did not know that I needed a permit since I was replacing a fence. That's one problem. But the second problem is with the language of the district. I know that it's against that language, but the fence that would be approved would not provide any type of security. A 3-foot high fence, picket style, is just a stepping stone over someone who wants to come into the house. And that's where I made the decision to put the taller fence in the front yard. I do not believe the structure of the fence detracts from the house itself. As everyone said, they drove by and they've seen that it does somewhat frame the house. It also replaced the fence that was in front of the house, obscuring the view, which is one of the requirements that the board is requesting. Secondly, the privacy aspect of the street is what was being debated last month and brought back today, is that having the chain link fence doesn't really provide as much safety as the wooden fence would. So I was asked to come back and, state my case.
Thank you, Mr. Orris. All right. Are there any members of the public that are present and wishing to be heard on this item? Hearing none, we'll go ahead and close public comment, and we will bring it to the board. Any board members wish to question, comment, address this issue? Mr. Marcus.
Yes, I have one question. I realize that what you're looking for is security for your family, certainly. And with all these stipulations about fences and the height and the particular type, could you not achieve the same thing with heavy landscaping in back, bougainvillea, something people can't walk through, even in back of a shorter fence?
Yeah, so that was broached last month with it because the chain link fence that runs along West Las Olas, part of the city permit is to require landscaping in front of it. And since the wording of the stipulation that you want to not obstruct the view of the home, I left the chain link fence with the idea of building podocarpus in front of it, which would add a second layer of defense. But that would seem to have some questions from the other board members, as now I'm having a chain link fence with a wooden fence, and the aesthetics of having the two different materials seem to raise a question.
All right, yeah, I may be saying something I shouldn't, but what if you were to
Don't worry, Mr. Marcus, we'll let you know.
Oh, thank you. One option could be you could keep the chain link fence, not have to come back to us, and as much as we like seeing you, but not have to come back here, and then put the podocarpus or whatever you want in front and make it really thick and heavy.
Well, that actually was the initial goal, because how everything went, and that's what I presented last month. And then the questions were raised about the multiple materials and the aesthetics that would provide. So that's why I was asked to come back. Okay. I'm not opposed to landscaping the chain link fence and leaving as it is, but as requested by the board.
But my understanding, and Trish would have to correct me on this, if you keep the fence and you're putting in landscaping, I don't think you come to us for approval for landscaping.
No, that's correct, from my knowledge. Okay. Go ahead, Trish, sorry.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, let me just ask for a point of clarification before we go to some other members of the board. Mr. Orris, I believe, well, I don't want to speak to the last time we were before the board, because quite frankly, I just don't remember that well. But the request tonight would be to, am I correct? It would be to reduce the height of the existing wooden privacy fence, as well as extending it along the section of your yard where the chain link fence currently exists?
That is how it's written, yes.
Okay. So
you're reducing the height of the existing fence where that stands?
I would prefer not to, but based on the conversations we had last month, it was impressed upon me that it probably would not pass.
Well, but that's what your application is for, is to reduce the height of that fence. And
you know what? I come back. I'm just trying to be your advocate here.
Sure.
But if you were to keep the wooden fence, which we don't like, but it's there, and you put the chain link fence in front, which is already there, and you just hide it with the podocarpus, I don't understand. I mean, the city may not like it as much as a brand new fence, but wouldn't that be a viable option for you?
It would be.
Well,
The wooden fence that's there is a violation of the code, so that would have to be removed. Okay. So that you can't keep that wooden fence that's there. The application as interpreted should be the removal of that wooden fence and replacement of this 4-foot fence. So that fence that is there is a violation of the code. That's why he's here.
Thank you.
Ms. Lyons?
I forget how high the chain link fence is. Can you remind me?
It's approximately 4 feet.
So what I don't understand is you know now what the code is, and the code is 3 feet, and you come back to us with a 4-foot solution.
Yes.
Yet, and you propose to then cover it with landscaping as well as the chain link fence. If you don't, at the time we discussed this a month ago, the idea was that you would bring conformity to the wooden fence by continuing the wooden fence. It was never my understanding that you were going to cover the chain link fence with shrubbery. But I can't understand why you'd come back to us with something that again doesn't meet code and ask us for an exception. Well, if the fence is 3 feet high and you also cut the wooden fence is 3 feet high and you cover it with landscaping, do you feel that that wouldn't then be enough protection?
At 3 feet, no, I do not. The 3 feet is a simple step over for a 6-foot high gentleman. I mean, it really would not provide any type of deference. And so I was asking for the exception secondary to the past transgressions that occurred all in the last year.
And you think a 4-foot, nobody could get over that?
My preference would be 6 feet, but I'm trying to find a happy medium between something that I don't feel is going to be worthwhile and something that is in direct opposition to the approval of the board.
Do you have a landscape plan in mind? I mean, are you going to move forward with that? I know that we don't approve that, but can you describe?
My entire yard needs to be landscaped, yes. And I'm trying to hold off with these to get this fencing situation settled so that I can then incorporate the landscaping so that it's seamless and congruent.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You know, following up on what Ms. Lyons said, you know, after the meeting last month, not only what I find interesting or notable is that not only do you come back with an application for a fence height, you know, which you know does not comport with the requirements of the code that we must consider, but also the horizontal planks as opposed to a vertical style fence, a vertical picket style fence, which also is non-compliant or is not compliant with the code. So, you know, I just, is there a reason for the decision to continue with this horizontal plank style?
I'll be honest with you. I did not think that the horizontal plank was in violation. According to the city permits, it's an acceptable orientation.
Trish, am I mistaken there? Or Sherry, either one of you? Were you paying attention?
So within the material and design guidelines, it does talk about vertical plank, but as you know, those material and design guidelines are for the consideration of the board.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, questions from the board? Mr. Parker, you're muted. Still muted, Dave, sorry. Can we give Mr. Parker a little bit of an assist, maybe unmute him?
Can you hear me?
We can now.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought.
No, that's okay.
Mine said it was unmuted.
No problem.
Okay. We, in the past, down there on 8th Avenue, just the next block there, we had submission for a horizontal fence, and we rejected that in view of having a vertical one. So when you talk about precedents, I think we got to consider where we're going with this.
That was actually on my mind, Dave. That was kind of what I was thinking about as we went forward here. Mr. Rosa, by the way, I do see that you're unmuted, so I'm assuming you're back with us. Earlier, I did call for any disclosures. Do you have any regarding this item?
I do not. No.
Okay,
I drive by the property every day, and since I'm on the mic here, I just wanted to make a quick comment. You know,
sure,
where I think there's just a disconnect in the guidelines here, and this is, again, it's an aesthetic preference, but whether it's vertical wood, horizontal wood, I see both as being more aesthetically appropriate than chain link. And even chain link, where we have this vinyl component where it's sprayed green, at the end of the day, you're either going to landscape or you're not. And we don't have purview over that. But whether you decide to do that is no question going to deter more than it would not. But I think getting so hung up on the orientation of the wood board is just going backward in the progression of what we're trying to accomplish. We previously gave some discretion to the prior applicant for what we, I think collectively all agreed and almost unanimously voted was an improvement to the district, an improvement for something that required investment. And similarly here, I've watched this renovation. I've watched it happen. There's no doubt the home is in a better condition than it was previously, and you're seeing a direct investment by the homeowner and the applicant in the neighborhood. So I think where we can push and pull and give a little discretion, we should. That said, I know this came before us last month. I made the motion to approve it as it was. So I think my position on it is clear. I also live in Sailboat Bend, where I've experienced what the applicant has experienced, where I've had unwanted guests, unwanted visitors walk onto my private property. And I think until that happens, and it's poetically appropriate in some fashion that it happened to Mr. Chavone 30 minutes ago, it's extremely frustrating from a homeowner's point of view. And I think where I'm getting with this and where I'm going with this is that where we can provide some discretion, and maybe this is sort of a combination of trying to incorporate some landscape requirement, even though I realize that's not part of what we can do. But if we can visually take away what the code is looking to keep out, what the guidelines are looking to keep out, which is this fence that doesn't really meet the height requirement. We want to see it at 3 feet. But if you have a dense shrub, you're not going to see the fence anyway. And I think it still accomplishes a couple things there. It accomplishes the privacy of the owner seeking. It still gives you the aesthetic in terms of what you want to see when you drive by. And most importantly, it gives the homeowner the safety that I think they're looking for. And that's where I veer in this circumstance, because I live here. I live in the neighborhood, and I know how it feels to be violated when someone comes onto your property. And I think the homeowner in this case could have had a much worse outcome when he dealt with the police reports reflecting the states and the facts of what happened previously. So I want to give every possible exception I can here, but I'm looking for it. And I can't find it, but I want so badly to give it the benefit that it needs, because why should the guidelines not catch up to the fact that this is a downtown community that may have some unwanted visitors at times? And I veer towards the private property owner having the right to privatize and keep private their property, where the guidelines distinguish otherwise. But I think we got to find a way to make this make sense. It can't be, I want a 3-foot picket fence. And unfortunately, a neighborhood that doesn't really allow for that in every circumstance. It just does not. And this is one of, by far, the most highly trafficked corners in the neighborhood. So, it's more of a rant than a point there, but I'm looking for a way to allow for the application in its current form to be passed, but with some stipulated attachment to there being a landscaping requirement. I know we can't do that, but maybe it's something that we look to strive for at being better in the future. And I would certainly bring that back to the board to see how that could happen, and certainly staff and Tricia and how we could do that, because I think it makes a lot of sense in this circumstance.
Thank you, Mr. Rosa. Mr. Marcus.
I just wanted to piggyback on one thing that Richard said, in that I do think we need to revisit this idea of fences in Sailboat Bend, because we have dealt with innumerable cases on this board of just this same issue. And our conversations go around and around each time. I think this is telling us, and it's telling Tricia and the city, that this is an issue that needs to be revised. So that's all I'm saying, because 3 out of 4 cases that seem to come before the board involve a window in the back or a fence. I mean, that's basically what we deal with. So, and I think we go through the same arguments every time. So I'm just looking for more organization. And if it's necessary, like I mentioned on the last case for the last applicant, maybe this area near Las Olas Boulevard needs to be thought of as a little bit differently than the rest of Sailboat Bend because it is closer to the urban boundary and it has other things happening than the heart of the neighborhood may be happening. That's all.
We're working on this. If I may just say something really quick.
Yes, please, Ms. Wall.
We're working on the Sailboat Bend ordinance now, so we'll be glad to talk about that towards the end of the agenda if you want. And then you could give us your suggestions as far as the ordinance is concerned.
Wonderful. Thank you. Ms. Lyons.
So I completely agree with what Mr. Marcus has raised as an issue. And that is, it seems to me, having driven by and walked by the property, that the property is more precarious in its location on Las Olas at the corner there of 8th and Las Olas. And I would support the board, the regulations being altered so that people along that street could in fact protect themselves and still remain within the boundaries of whatever regulations are whatever we decide in the future for that particular street. But I do think the particular street in that corner does create an exception.
Yeah, and I think, I'm sorry, Ms. Lyons.
Yeah, and as long as the fence is covered by shrubbery, which you've promised you will do, and you will lower it to 4 feet, and you think that will be protection from people hopping onto your property, then once the landscaping is there, we're not going to see it anyway. So maybe that is something to consider. I really sympathize with your situation of people coming on your property.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's a distinction here, and let me be very candid, Ms. Orris. I am troubled by the fact that you returned to the board with a facially non-compliant request, but I am sympathetic and empathetic to your cause. But I think that Mr. Marcus and Ms. Lyons and Mr. Rosa and Mr. Parker all kind of addressed this need for a distinction of this area of the Sailboat Bend Historic District as it pertains to protection, not as to structural changes of a historic home or of a home, a contributing home in this historic district, but as to the boundary setting devices which we allow for protecting those historic properties. And so to that extent, as troubled as I am by the wavering from the requirements of the code, I think that for the exceptions that this board will often give, that this is certainly a circumstance of necessity, and one which I would consider. So with that, is there any other discussion on the application? If not, I would certainly entertain a motion. Anybody have? Mr. Marcus.
You opened it up to the public.
Yes, we did. We did. There was none, and so we closed public comment. If there is anybody who has popped in since, we certainly would be happy to hear from them.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Is there anybody that we know of here from the public that wants to be heard on this issue?
I don't see any hands raised at this time.
Okay, great. All right. So then, yeah, I would entertain a motion if there is one to be had.
I'm happy to make the motion, Mr. Chair. It was my motion previous meeting.
Sure.
I'm struggling here with multiple windows open to find the language, but I would make a motion and distinguish here that it's not in conformance, as we know, but to move forward with the applicant's request for a 4-foot fence to be approved.
And that would be subject to the approval of the building, zoning, and all ULDR requirements, including landscaping?
Confirmed, correct.
Okay. Is there a second? Hang on. Would that also be inclusive of the findings of fact as discussed by this board?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second to Mr. Rosa's motion? Is there a second to Mr. Rosa's motion? I'm sorry, Ms. Lyons, did I hear that there was a second?
I second.
Okay, thank you. Seconded by Ms. Cesara. Is there any discussion on the motion? Mr. Marcus, you're muted. I swear I didn't do it. Still muted. You're good. There you go.
2 questions for the applicant, if I can remember them now. Your plan, the fence will be the same fence on both sides at the same height. Is that correct?
When you refer to both sides, do you mean the 8th and West Las Olas, or
Well,
the two?
you're talking from the little diagram below the pictures on page 38. You're showing 2 red lines that show the 2 portions.
Correct.
Of the fence. Okay.
I just wanted to be clear because the other side of the house has the wooden fence there. So I didn't know which side you were referring to.
So the new fence will be how tall?
The new fence will be 4 feet tall.
And it will be vertical planks, horizontal planks?
Horizontal will allow it.
Okay. And you're planning to put the landscaping in front, in back?
I think the city requires it to be in front. So it would be between the street and the fence.
And will that be the protocarpus, or what are you thinking of?
That's what my thought is, podocarpus.
That's good. I just wanted to make sure it's the same. And one last question, the existing fence on, I guess, the south side of the property, how tall is that? And that's a chain link fence?
No, it is a wooden fence. It is the same height and same orientation as the fence that's in question.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Marcus. Any other discussion on the motion? Hearing none, Ms. Wallen, do you want to go ahead and read the resolution?
Yes, a resolution of the Historic Preservation Board of the City of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, approving a certificate of appropriateness for the property located at 734 West Las Olas Boulevard, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, for the installation of a 4-foot-high horizontal wood plank fence, case number UDP HP 21003.
Thank you so much. All right, with that, we will call the question. All those in favor of the motion as made, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Mr. Chabon, I see a hand raised. I don't know if that's because you have a question or were you voting?
Is it possible for me to be fair and recuse myself because I've been in and out of this conversation with the police department?
Sure, we will certainly.
You can only abstain from voting if you have a conflict.
Okay. Then based on what I heard last month and based on my sympathy for the guy's intrusion of bad guys, since that's what I'm dealing with right now, and my confidence in this good mix of my colleagues, I'm going to say I'm in favor of it passing.
Thank you, Mr. Chabon. Are there any opposed to the motion as stated? Hearing none. Are there any abstentions due to conflict? Hearing none. All right, the item carries. Thank you so much again, Mr. Orris.
I do have one comment, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, please.
And this is really to Tricia and the city. I would hope that with all these issues that continually come up, especially on these properties near Las Olas and Sailboat Bend, I think some consideration of making some of these security issues different in that area might be very worthwhile because we're facing this on every single issue.
Thank you. Ms. Orris, thank you so much. And congratulations, sir. Good luck to you.
I would like to agree with him on that. I live in Sailboat Bend for many years, and I totally agree with what he said.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I say something else? Hello? Can you hear me?
Oh, we can. If it has to, there's not a motion down there right now. Hang on 2 seconds. I want to.
Oh, I'm sorry. Never mind.
No, that's okay. I just want to work through the agenda because we're going to get to the section for the good of the city in just a moment. And at that point in time, I think it would be great to address all these issues because I know that there's some conversation we need to have with the city attorney and with Trish. So the next will be communication to the city commission. I don't believe we have any this month. Is there any communication that we believe we need to have at this time?
Doesn't she have to read what we just approved?
The resolution.
I read it already.
We already read it.
All right.
That's okay. Pay attention, Ms. Lyons. Come on. All right. So I don't think we have any communication with the city commission, but for the good of the city, I am curious. Mrs. Zara, yes, you had a comment or a concern you wanted to address.
I also.
Mrs.
Just living in Sailboat Bend, I agree with what Arthur said about, I would like for us not to be notorious for nitpicking about fence. I know we have to have I understand that you have to, but if we could just do it in a way, somehow set a precedence or something that the fences and all that is not, when you have people coming in and putting money into historical homes, such a great thing rather than seeing them tearing them down and filling a lot and cutting trees down and filling the lot, with cement. That's what changes the climate and the breeze and the light, everything in our neighborhood. So when you have someone come into the historical neighborhood and they're putting up a fence and stuff to the house, it's so for me who has lived there for 26, 27 years. That's all. I'm sorry. I mean, that's just how I feel. But Arthur, I believe, is way more versed on it. And I get passionate and crazy, but I think Arthur I would like to work with him somehow where he could use his, expertise and I could use my passion and someone who loves the neighborhood.
I think
I bought in that neighborhood because of the historical homes, knowing that there were rules. And one of the first one that freaked me out was the weird thing about fences, and then seeing developers tear homes down and cut trees down and fill them with these huge property buildings with garage doors, and it looked like Weston. And like Arthur said when we were talking about the garage doors, how it doesn't fit in. So that's all. I'm sorry to go on and on. I'd love to work with Arthur so that we could make it where we're known for welcoming people that want to take a historical home and fix it up. It's very expensive. There's always been promises of tax incentive, and that's all. I'm sorry to go on and on. It's just I'm very passionate about that part. That's why I'm on the board.
We certainly appreciate it, and I appreciate your posture, Mrs. Zara. Thank you for your comments and your passion. Mr. Marcus?
Yeah, I first wanted to thank Mrs. Zara and also say that I think we have great professional help in our staff. So I have really good confidence because they've made a lot of progress in the last year. I'm bringing up a totally different issue. In Fort Lauderdale, let me start from the beginning. As everyone knows, there's a concern regarding the rapidly escalating residential property costs in all of our South Florida coastal cities. I'm talking along the coast and the water, which threatens to totally destroy so much of our own older and significant architectural heritage, especially the housing heritage. That's what I'm looking at. In Fort Lauderdale, the elaborate Anheuser-Busch estate is currently on the market, and there's a fear that developers could demolish this important landmark since there are no protections on any of these buildings. And there's lots of these grand homes all over the city. I think the city of Fort Lauderdale has made important progress this past year to identify architectural resources within the city, but these consist mainly of the smaller homes and the smaller buildings. I would like to propose that the city add a listing of an inventory of these architecturally significant single-family larger residences, and also at the same time try and provide some incentives that may make it worthwhile for these people to keep the buildings. Now, I know the city has incentives already, and Trish can go into it further, including tax exemption, parking reductions, waivers for historic preservation for historic structures, and FEMA historic structures exemptions. But I think we're talking about values that are going into the multi-millions. And I think we really need to look at if we're willing to save anything here transfer of development rights from historic properties to other designated sites in the city. I know that the city is already looking at this. And also, could an historic property be granted additional height or additional square footage for an addition if the historic building is retained? Tricia would have to explain exactly what we can do now and what's proposed, but I'm just looking generally that I know that setback requirements are already being reduced as part of these incentives, but we need a big incentive to counteract these big numbers. So and I asked the city and Tricia in particular if there are any other additional perks, so to speak, for lack of a better word, which might be granted. Time of processing, reduced permit fees perhaps. But I think the big one here would be transfer of development rights, if that could be made to work, as tricky as it is. So that's my talk.
Thank you, Mr. Marcus. Trish, you want to go ahead and address anything?
Sure. To respond to the TDR question, it's actually scheduled for City Commission for first reading of adoption of a TDR program tomorrow night. It came before the Historic Preservation Board in August, went through Planning and Zoning Board in October, November, and December, and now City Commission first reading with the second reading in 2 weeks. And if adopted, it would go into effect within 30 days after that second reading.
Great. So, Trish, what I would like to see if you could maybe prepare it for us for our next meeting and circulate it before the meeting would be a list of incentives that someone would have if they own a historic home. And then based on that, Arthur, maybe Mr. Marcus, if you could produce what you think would be a good correspondence to the city as to further recommendations if we think that there needs to be more, if we think that there should be greater, incentives to persons, and also, if there's something that we think that they need to take to identify these larger homes, if you could prepare something maybe and bring it to the board for our consideration, maybe at the next meeting, we could then actually talk about working it, modifying it, addressing it if needed, and then ship that off to the commission.
Well, I have a question for Trish. Is this the way it should work? I mean, is this something that you as staff can already include in the studies that are ongoing? Or do we need a whole new city commission thing?
So just to respond to the incentives issue, we do have on our website a list of available incentives. We also have a video that runs through all of the available incentives that we do have. We have adopted 4 new incentives, plus the pending TDR program within the past year. So we've made a lot of progress, and there is still more work to be done, but it does take time. Any new incentives take time to understand how it works with our existing code, how it works within the state of Florida, and how it impacts our financial resources within the city as well. So it's not something that we're not looking into, but there is only one staff person, so it does take time.
Yeah, but you're Superwoman, so come on.
Yeah.
As far as architectural resources surveys, we are moving forward with those citywide, but again, it does take time. It's a very time-intensive process, and we do proceed with those as time and funding allows.
So what you're saying is that you could have that to us by May meeting instead of the April meeting?
No. So right now we have a grant from the state of Florida for $10,000 where we're pursuing an architectural resource survey of Crescent Park and Pasadena Park, kind of on the south side of the city. So we're taking a look at all the structures there that are over 50 years old, and we're giving ourselves a little bit of a buffer in that research where we're looking at properties that were built 1973 and earlier. So we only get small amounts of money at a time. It does take a lot of resources from staff as well as a hired consultant to move forward with that. And all grant money is applied for at least a year in advance. So we don't have any more grant money on the horizon for surveying. We chose to apply for a grant for next fiscal year for kind of an overall historic preservation strategic plan. So we are on a list to be considered for that through the Florida State Legislature, but we won't hear whether or not we receive those funds until July 1st. So it's just on this ongoing cycle, but we're trying to be strategic in the way that we're looking at neighborhoods as far as areas that have high concentrations of buildings that are over 50 years old that would potentially yield more potential historic districts or potential historic resources. And it is difficult to just go out one by one and try to do an architectural resource survey.
So let me ask you, instead of doing a true survey, I mean, when you see a property like the one that Mr. Marcus mentioned, the former Anheuser-Busch property, which clearly has a history, I would seemingly qualify as a historic property. What steps, if any, do you take once a building like that is readily apparent to kind of bring it into the fold?
So unless directed, I don't do anything.
Sure.
If an application is submitted for historic designation, then I would, proceed in writing a staff report and most likely working with the Historical Society to obtain historical information about the property and figure out if it is even eligible to be a historic landmark in the city of Fort Lauderdale. So
this is a question that's out of sheer ignorance, and I apologize, but are you aware roughly of how many of these larger scale homes we consider historic in the city, that are on the Finger Islands and kind of areas like that?
Do we have a list?
Was that a question for me?
Yeah, that was. Sorry. Yeah, that was. Sorry. Do you want me to restate it? I apologize.
No, I don't know.
Okay. No, and that's a perfectly acceptable answer.
Question.
Tim.
Just a comment. Everything that I'm learning here from everybody is extremely exciting, and it's rewarding. And again, I keep coming back to say we all want the same thing. And I promise you, folks, if I would have hit that mega million lotto for a couple of $100 million, I can tell you, and on my heart of hearts, I would have gone to the Historical Society and said, here is a few $1 million with the intent to say, you've got to use this money to start the ball rolling to purchase or fund or go into co-op with property owners so that we can make this thing practical and achievable. I agree with everything that everyone's saying as far as there are beautiful properties in our area that should be preserved. But what we don't have is the resources to do so. And we're really throwing darts in the dark, hoping that if we tell the future property owner or current property owner that now you have this task, we're really not going to be successful. And we see it coming before us all the time. It costs money. And if I was to sit down with our commission, I would say, listen, if you're really serious about this, and let's get some money. Let's put it into our tax rolls. Let's fund it. How do we do it? We fund our schools. We fund our other good of the people issues. Let's put this in a column and start to collect some dollars. And let's, like when I was up for it at my property, if someone would have sat down with me and said, here's what your property value is in the market today. Let's talk about what we can do. I would have been more than happy to take less up front and go into a joint venture with the city to where we owned it together. And I would have over time gotten my benefit, and I would be able to pass it on to my family, which was my intent from 50 years ago, to leave something to my family. But, to lose it all because it becomes historic in dollars and cents, that's where we have problems. The value gets chopped so bad that it's almost impossible for anyone to be in agreement with this unless they can afford it or have the passion to take the steps economically backwards to maintain the building and live in it. So I'm all for this. And I've always said it from the beginning, let's find some money and let's make everybody happy.
Thank you, Mr. Chabon. Mr. Marcus.
I'm sorry. I do agree with a lot of what Tim said, that I think that we should identify these buildings. One of the things, if you'll notice when I was reading my little spiel before, is that I did not mention the word historic. I'm talking about really the identification of architecturally significant homes. If they seem to be historic, that's a determination that will be made at a later date. But right now, I don't think the city even has the resource guide to know how much we have and what's there. So that I'm just looking for an initial listing. So I gather, Trish, and I gather, Mr. Chair, that we have to send a letter to the commission to make something like this happen?
I mean, I think if we're looking to get approval, the directive for Trish and her office, which is to kind of try to, at some point in time, develop a guide or some sort of listing of architecturally, significant, locales or homes or properties, then, we should express to the commission, my opinion is that we as the Historic Preservation Board should express to the commission that this is something which we believe would be helpful, right? We think it would be helpful for the preservation of the historic nature of the properties within the city to identify those which have not yet been designated as historic properties, but that are still architecturally significant for their historic nature.
That was a good letter, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. Look forward to seeing you type that up. All right.
This is Shari. Could I just say something, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
You have to write a letter. You could just have a motion as a communication to the city commission.
No, I understand, but I want the communication to be thought out, and I want it to be put together. I don't want to do this one off the cuff. So let's get something prepared in writing and circulated that we can bring before the board to modify and make sure we're clear with for next meeting. Okay? Because I don't think this is an urgent pressing matter. I just think it's something that we want to address. All right.
Is it fair to include areas like Victoria Park and Collie Hammock?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I see those, I'm very familiar with that area too, both of those areas, and I see buildings being torn down all the time. And it concerns me because it's a beautiful area and it's ultimately going to be ruined.
Well, I don't have a listing other than one or two houses here, and I would work with Trish to come up with something initially. But I think if any of us are traveling around Fort Lauderdale and we seem to locate one of these great houses, if you could jot down the address, it would be a big start, a big help on that.
I'd be happy to do that. Happy to help in any way I can. You want a list of places that I find well worth preserving?
Well, I think let's get the letter, and then we'll have to work with Trish and let her.
I think let's be cautious. Let's be cautious. If that's the type of project that I think would be outside the bounds of our board itself, but would be probably welcomed for our board members to be involved with. But I think that the communication to the commission, just expressing our belief that this is an important thing to identify, or these are important properties to identify, I think would be well taken. So we'll do that. Trish, do you have something you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, I just wanted to show my screen briefly as far as what the progress that has been made on the surveys so far. Can you see?
Yes.
See the screen? So this is what we did last year with the funds that we received from the state, and what we used them to pursue different neighborhoods for architectural resource survey, which I think is similar to what you're asking for and does fall under the purview of the city of Fort Lauderdale as a certified local government, and something that we're tasked with doing and continually to do. But it, like I said, it does take time. So I've sent this out to you guys a couple of times now, but it is available on the website. You can click on any of these boxes to see more information. So like Barbara mentioned, Victoria Park, you can click on that and get more information on properties that were surveyed, boundary map of a potential historic district, which most of it is actually already designated as part of a multiple property listing, and then 54 buildings that were documented as being eligible for listing individually on the National Register. So I think this is what you're looking for, but like I said, it takes time and money to pursue. But this is where we've started, and the intent is to do neighborhoods citywide.
So and that's something that I think that, well, and correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, what I got from Arthur's initial comment was, we look at these neighborhoods which clearly have historic relevance, right? Victoria Park, Shady Banks, Coley Hammock, right? You go through there, that's old Florida, right? Like that's old Florida, that's old Fort Lauderdale. But then you have some of these mansions on the water or tucked away that maybe don't fall into some of those neighborhoods that I think we also need to address. And candidly, I was unaware about the Anheuser-Busch property until recently when I happened to see a headline come through, some notification on my phone. And I happened to pull up the listing and look at that property. What a gorgeous place. I mean, that's one of those homes or pieces of property that I wish I hit the lottery with Tim. We could split it, Tim. I'm not giving it all to you, but we could split it so that I could buy that place, and give it
and keep it that way.
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly.
It would be awesome. But it takes money.
It's beautiful. Exactly. So I think that it's important for us to express my belief. And Arthur, I mean, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but what I got from what you were saying is we need to express to the commission, right, that they need to do what it takes to get Trish the resources she needs to identify those types of additional properties beyond the surveys that there are. That's kind of what I think.
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll put something together.
It's getting late, guys. It's 6:30. I'm going to try to head home to say goodnight to my family and then try to go to sleep while I can, maybe, if they'll let me. So is there any other pressing matters? And are there any other pressing matters that need to be addressed for the good of the city? Hearing none, I
got to find a prowler.
Yeah, just give him my business card. Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Thank you.
Mr. Marcus, the meeting will be adjourned at 6:37.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.